All right, this is Mrs. Zimnick, and I'm going to walk you through some helpful hints for Chapter 4. This is a difficult chapter. I promise it gets better. There's just a lot going on in this chapter, so that's why I wanted to do a little extra to help you review. First thing you want to know is that this chapter is called the Age of Absolutism, so we need to talk about what that means. So an absolute ruler is one that has all the power in their hands, and usually the excuse they would give was the divine right theory. So divine right means that God chose them to rule. So it's really heavily based in Christianity and the idea that God chose this king or queen. That's why they were born, and therefore that's why they're allowed to do. So that's why they do whatever they want. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through kind of our different power. I start this unit off with a top 5 list, which is just how I organize it, just because I feel like this is such a tough unit that I think if we can do that, it makes it a little easier. So let's go to our first step. Then in 1500, when we're starting off our chapter, this is what Europe looked like. We've got Spain at the top. Strong empire, right? They've got all the Americas. They've got a ton of money flowing in from that. France is at number 2. They're still a strong country. They're very devout Catholics, but they don't have quite as big of an empire as Spain, but they're working on it. England is number 3, and really the reason that we put them at 3 is because they've got a great deal of turmoil going on between the Catholics and the Protestants in the 1500s. That's really tearing them apart. The Germanic states of Austria and Prussia are going to be at number 4 in power. And then we have Russia at the bottom, mostly because they were just so behind the rest of Europe. They still are using feudalism. They still have serfs, and they're just behind. So I'm going to walk you through each country and tell you why they rose or fell. So Spain starts off at number 1. They're going to fall to number 3, and let's talk about why. A lot of it had to do with the efforts of Philip II. And some things he does really strengthen Spain. Like he wanted to really build Catholicism in Spain, which, would have strengthened that first country. The trouble was that he's going to force it upon people and really lead what we call the Inquisition and go after anybody who wasn't Spanish Catholic. So there were, a high percentage of minority groups. We've got Jews living in Spain at this time. We've got Muslims living in Spain at this time, and he does not tolerate any of that. The other thing that's going to hurt Spain is the inflation coming in from that excess gold from their empire and the costly wars they're going to wage, especially in the Netherlands, because of the Catholics and the Protestants. The defeat of the Armada is definitely a major event here that's going to switch that power from Spain to England. And it's because those quote-unquote devil ships that the English set fire to their own ships. Remember, we watched that in class. That's what really kind of makes the Armada defeat themselves. They actually run into each other, and because they were bigger ships, they weren't as maneuverable. That's a huge problem for Spain, and they never quite recover from that. Despite the fact we've got a real golden age of the arts here. We've got El Greco and Miguel Cervantes writing things like Don Quixote. So there's definitely a golden age for the arts in Spain, but despite that, we really start to see them politically decline. They're going to start to slowly but surely lose control of their empire. Let's talk about number 1, which is England. They're going to rise. They're going to go pretty high up from 3 to 1. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that Elizabeth I sets the tone of compromise in her country. She's going to compromise in a lot of ways. She's going to create that Anglican Church, which effectively ends the Catholic-Protestant debate. She's going to work with Parliament, and that's huge because she's really showing Parliament that she values them. So the next point is when she dies, we know that she was the virgin queen, right? She never married. She married her country is what she said. So there's no heir. So after her, what we see happen is eventually we get Charles I, and he does not want to listen to Parliament. So Parliament's used to having a say. He yanks that away from them. That makes them absolutely furious, okay? So we get a couple of things happen. The Petition of Right is when Parliament forces Charles I to sign it and limit his power. And he signs it, but he hates it, absolutely hates it. And that's when he fires all of Parliament. He says, okay, I'll sign this, but you're all fired. So that's when we get the long Parliament here. And that's when Parliament meets essentially on their own. So you're really seeing the struggle here in England between the king and the Parliament, right? So we get that English Civil War, which is between the king and his forces were called the Cavaliers, and the Parliament and his forces were called the Roundheads. And that was led by Oliver Cromwell of the Roundheads here. Cromwell wins, Parliament wins, but what ends up happening is that he starts acting like a king, and people can't stand him, and eventually they kill Cromwell too, just like they killed Charles I. And that's when they bring back Charles II, who had fled. He was in hiding because his father was executed, so he took off. The Restoration brings him back, and he starts again listening to Parliament. So you're really starting to see that they're yanking the power out of the hands of the king, bringing it into the Parliament. What really is going to do that is this Glorious Revolution and English Bill of Rights, though. The Glorious Revolution brings William and Mary, who were hiding in the Netherlands, back to England with no bloodshed. That's why it's called the Glorious Revolution. Okay, they had this bloody civil war. They had chopped off Charles I's head. We get this revolution with no bloodshed. And then what William and Mary do, one of the first things they do is sign an English Bill of Rights. And it's really going to give power to Parliament and to the English people. It's going to spell out the rights they have. Right to a trial by jury, freedom of speech, right? These are things that are eventually, we know, really going to influence our own Bill of Rights. So what does this all mean? Well, it means by 1700, the English people have so many more rights than really anybody else in Europe at this point. And the other thing we see is that in England, they've got a limited monarchy. It's not an absolute monarchy. And that's really going to allow them to flourish and grow. So that's why their power is going to increase. All right, in France, I put here, they look strong, but you don't really want to be fooled here, okay? There's definitely some religious problems between Henry IV and the Edict of Nantes, which is going to solve those problems. The French Protestants are called Huguenots, and they were the minority. They were being persecuted. So in the Edict of Nantes, it allows toleration and freedom of religion for most French Huguenots. Cardinal Richelieu is going to be the guy that's really going to strengthen the central government, bring a lot of power under the central government and into that king. And Jean-Baptiste Colbert will also strengthen the finances of France. Now, you might say, well, that's good, right? They've got a lot of money. They've got a strong government. Well, what ends up happening is King Louis XIV, he was known as the Sun King because he said everything should revolve around him. He's going to waste a lot of that money. He's going to waste it on a couple of things. One, himself. He's going to build a ridiculously huge palace in Versailles. And two, on a lot of costly wars. And that's just going to drain the treasury. So he does say, I am the state. And that really, I think, sums up his whole idea and attitude of being an absolute monarch. So on the surface, I keep them at number 2. I'll tell you why. Because on the surface, they look powerful. But don't be fooled. Remember we said in class that the average person in France is really starting to get fed up with their king by 1750. All right, moving on. The Germanic states are going to drop, mostly because they're just not able to unify, and that's going to really hold them back. One of the major things causing that disunification is the 30 Years' War, one of the worst in Europe's history, actually. And the Treaty of Westphalia ends the 30 Years' War. So the 30 Years' War is a war that's really caused between Catholics and Protestants. Again, kind of a broken record on that. It seems to be the cause of many wars during this time. And the Treaty of Westphalia will end that war, but what it does is it creates 360 different city-states in what we would now call Germany, Austria, and parts of Poland. And when you've got 360, it's just really hard to come together, and get anything done. Austria and Prussia are going to be the 2 Germanic states that will be the strongest, and they'll really do that by force. That's going to be a common theme we see in the Germanic states. There's going to be a lot of focus on the military and a lot of focus on trying to really upset the balance of power and try to get more power for themselves. Maria Theresa is kind of, we said, a positive moment here. She's really going to do some positive things in Austria and realign the government and do a lot to help the poor. And she was very well loved in Austria. And we also saw a flourishing of the arts under her rule with music in Vienna, and Mozart is going to compose a lot during her era. So it's a real good period for Austria. Frederick William I and Frederick II are both going to be Prussian leaders. Prussia does not exist today, but it's part of what today is Germany and Poland and a little bit of the Czech Republic. And Prussia back then, though, was a powerhouse, mostly because of their military. And these guys are really going to be responsible for building up the military and not being afraid to use it. We're going to see Prussia pick quite a few fights, both with Austria and with other countries in Europe. And that's why we're going to see them drop in power. They're not dropping in strength, really, but I would say the reason that we're taking them down is because they're not able to really unify, and that's going to hold them back. All right, and last we'll see here Russia. Russia started off at number 5. They're going to rise slightly to number 4. Russia was feudal and really just kind of behind the rest of Europe. Most of Europe had given up, feudalism back in the Middle Ages, back in the 1300s. Well, Russia's going to cling to that, guys. They're going to cling on to it until the 1800s, really the late 1800s. That's going to be a problem for them. It's going to continue to be a problem. Peter the Great really tries to change this. Here's our fun fact for a bonus point. If you comment on the website and tell me the fun fact of this show is Peter the Great was 6'4". He's a huge towering guy for back then, especially. All right, there's your fun fact. Okay, moving on. He really is going to make efforts to change this. He's going to go to Western Europe. He's so impressed by what he sees there, and he wants to bring it back. The technology, even things like the style of dress, the fact that he saw nobody in Europe was wearing shaggy beards, so he's going to force people in Russia to cut their beards. Well, a lot of people don't like that, and they tried to challenge him, and he did not tolerate that. He will kill anybody in his way. He also going to carry out a war with Sweden to try to get a warm water port so he can really increase trade in his country. So that's kind of some positive and some negative things that he's going to be responsible for doing. Catherine the Great will be the next major leader we'll see in Russia. She's actually a Germanic princess, and she kind of weasels her way to the top. We said she's actually accused of killing her husband, or hiring someone, I should say, to kill her husband to be able to take power. So she makes some positive changes, and I listed them right here. Positive changes: she's going to expand the borders. She's going to bring more education, especially to girls. But she's going to refuse to free the serfs. And this is what, again, I can't stress this enough, it's going to hold Russia back. We're going to see a period of Russian history of really 400 or 500 years here of the vast amount of people in Russia having little to no rights. And they're going to get madder and madder and madder until it explodes in 1917. So we're setting that up here. A lot of what's going to happen in the 20th century we're setting up right here. So what's the end result? What does this all mean? Well, by 1750, here's our major order of powers. England has rose up to number 1. All right. France, they're still number 2, but don't be fooled. There's definitely signs of trouble here. There's signs of crumbling, but from a distance, they still look pretty strong. Spain, I have at 3, and they are sliding downward. They are declining. And that's, again, because of the costly wars, the defeat of the Armada, and the inflation they're dealing with by the 1700s. They're just going to lose control of their North American empire. Russia goes slightly up. They're going to expand their borders. They're going to get some technology, but their refusal to end feudalism is going to keep them from going any higher than this. And the Germanic states, despite some pretty solid attempts by some people, some leaders to really fix things, they're just going to have trouble unifying, and that's really going to hold them back. So make sure you understand the people that made these changes happen. Make sure you understand the actions that made these changes happen. And think about maybe which monarch, which is a king or queen, or a czar if you're talking about Russia, but which monarch here is going to be the one you admire the most? Which one do you think did the best job? Which one do you think did the worst job? And think about why. Is it because Peter's working with the boyars in Russia, the Russian nobles? Do you admire that? Do you like that he brought technology in? Or are you going to accuse him of being a bad leader because he's not going to free the serfs? Do you admire Elizabeth I for what she did in England? Or think about the rulers you like and the rulers you don't like, and make sure you can back that up. So that is chapter 4 in a nutshell. There's a lot to it. Make sure you come in and see me, maybe during seminar or after school, if you have any questions at all. I know this is a tough unit, so I am here to help. So hopefully this video will help you a little bit review at home, and thanks for listening. So don't forget to comment in the comments listed right there. You can just click the little comment bubble and use your school email and your own name and tell me our fun fact of the day, and I'll give you a bonus point for taking the time to listen. Thanks for listening.